She was sold like cattle in front of a crowd that turned their eyes away, not because they couldn't pay, but because they couldn't bear to watch. A drunk father. A dusty street. And a girl too broken to cry, until a quiet rancher stepped forward with nothing but a worn silver coin in his hand, and eyes that didn't see her as property, but as something lost that needed saving. But when he brought her home to the edge of the prairie, something about her silence began to unravel. Because the girl who never spoke, had been listening all along. Welcome to Storytelling and Beyond, where we bring you unforgettable love stories from the raw heart of the Wild West. Each tale is handcrafted with emotional depth, cinematic narration, and the untamed beauty of the frontier. Don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you never miss a story that'll steal your breath and stir your soul. Let's begin. The noon sun glared down on Dry Creek Junction, where heat curled off the ground and silence clung to the air. Folks gathered out front of Red Molly's saloon, but there were no horses on display, no wagons or tools. Just one girl. Thin. Dusty. Barefoot. Her hair hung in wild streaks over her face, and her chin trembled even though no tears fell. Her father, if the town dared still call him that, was Hank Laramie. A known drunk, he swayed on the warped platform, gripping a half-empty whiskey bottle in one hand and the girl's wrist in the other. She don't speak. Can't hear a damn thing. But she's got arms strong enough to haul water and hands fit for scrubbing. Useless to me now. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. A few women turned their children away. No one moved forward. Not for a deaf girl with no name, sold by her father like a worn-out saddle. Then came the sound of slow, sure footsteps crunching through the dirt. Colt Rayner stepped through the crowd, tall in his worn boots and long brown coat that had seen 100 rides across hard country. His face was unreadable, weathered like canyon rock, and for a long moment, he said nothing at all. Then, he pulled something from his coat pocket, a single silver coin, tarnished and scratched from years of wear. He bent down and dropped it into the dirt at Hank's feet. That all you got? Hank spat, nearly slipping off the crate. You think I'd sell my flesh and blood for one lousy coin? Colt didn't blink. You already did, he said, voice quiet but hard enough to silence the air. This coin's not payment. It's the end of her suffering. The sheriff had been watching from the edge of the saloon, his thumbs hooked into his belt. Ain't exactly legal, he muttered, stepping forward, but if the girl agrees, we'll call it done. All eyes turned to her. She didn't speak. She didn't move for a breathless moment. Then, slowly, she stepped down from the crate and walked over to Colt. Without looking back, she took the coat off his arm and wrapped it tightly around her small shoulders. Her face was streaked with dust. Her lips were pressed tight, but there was a glint in her eyes, cautious, but not afraid. What's your name? Colt asked softly. She crouched and traced the letters into the ground. May. He nodded. All right, May. Let's go home. He lifted her gently onto his horse, swung up behind her, and they rode out of Dry Creek as the town watched in silence. No one stopped them. No one clapped. But the look in Colt's eyes and the way May leaned back against him said more than words ever could. And somewhere beyond the hills, where the prairie met the sky, the girl who never spoke would finally be heard. The ranch was miles from town, tucked beyond the copper-red hills and bordered by a dry creek that hadn't seen rain in 3 summers. Colt Rayner's land was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't echo, it simply settled over everything. The wind whispered through brittle grass, the horses grazed with slow patience, and the only sound most days was the creak of the barn door or the clink of his spurs on stone. May didn't speak as they arrived. She didn't ask questions. She didn't even seem to flinch when the dog barked or when the horses came trotting up to inspect her. She just stood beside the fence, eyes fixed on the horizon like she wasn't sure whether this was still real or just another cruel turn in her life. Colt showed her the small guest room off the kitchen, the same room his late wife had used to dry herbs and write letters that were never sent. He laid clean blankets on the cot, set a pitcher of water beside the wash basin, and left without saying much. Words had never been his strength anyway. For the next few days, she worked in silence. But not out of fear. She moved with intention. Feeding the chickens before dawn, brushing the horses, sweeping the porch, and tending to the kitchen as if she'd known its layout all her life. She didn't speak, but Colt started noticing things. The first clue came when he dropped a metal pan in the kitchen. It clattered loudly against the stone floor. May, who was bent over near the fireplace, jerked upright in surprise. A deaf girl wouldn't have reacted to the noise. Another time, he sat by the corral tightening a hinge on the gate and muttered under his breath, "Need more nails." 10 minutes later, without a word, May walked out of the barn and handed him a tin box filled with nails. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't smile. But she had clearly heard him. Colt said nothing. Not then. He didn't want to scare her or make her think she was being accused of anything. But the idea took root and began to grow. May was not truly deaf. She had learned to appear that way. Maybe out of fear. Maybe out of protection. One morning, while tying fence posts, he looked up and saw her standing a few feet away, holding a tin mug of coffee. The air was cold, and her breath fogged around her face. She didn't hand him the cup, just placed it on a stump and sat down across from him. Watching. Waiting. He decided then. "I know you hear me," he said, his voice low and steady. May's body stiffened. Her fingers curled around the edges of her skirt. She didn't respond, but she didn't run either. He took off his gloves and looked at her. "I ain't mad. I'm not gonna tell no one. You don't have to keep pretending. Not here." Her eyes slowly met his. There was fear in them, but more than that, there was weariness. A kind of exhaustion that came from too many days of being silent when you wanted to scream. Still, she said nothing. Later that night, they sat by the fireplace, the room lit with only a single lantern. Colt carved a piece of wood with his pocketknife, and May sat beside him, folding linen napkins with mechanical precision. The wind outside howled low, like a coyote had wandered too close. "I lost someone once," he said suddenly, not looking up. "My wife. Talked more than I ever did. Used to sing while she kneaded bread. After she died, this place got so quiet it started to feel like it weren't even real anymore." He set down the carving and looked at her. "Then you showed up. And now it don't feel so quiet." May blinked rapidly. Her lips parted just slightly. Then she whispered, voice rough from years of silence, "He told me to pretend. Said if I spoke, someone would take me away. Said it was safer to be a burden than a girl someone might want." Colt's jaw clenched. He didn't speak for a moment, then said, "You ain't a burden. And you're not going anywhere. Not unless you want to." She nodded. A single tear slid down her cheek, but she didn't brush it away. And slowly, almost without meaning to, she leaned against his arm. Her small frame trembled as she exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. Colt didn't move. He just let her stay there, staring into the fire, letting the silence settle around them like an old friend. And for the first time since May had arrived, the ranch didn't feel empty. It felt like the start of something whole. It was late afternoon when the wind shifted over the plains, bringing with it the scent of dust, sweat, and something else Colt hadn't felt in months, unrest. The sky darkened at the edges, even though no storm was due. Birds lifted suddenly from the trees as if warned by some instinct only nature knew. And then came the sound, hooves, steady and heavy, cutting across dry earth. A man approached the ranch gates alone on a tall black stallion. He wore a long dark coat, his boots polished and stiff, and his hat pulled low over his brow. But it was the scar that caught Colt's eye first. A long, ugly mark running from the man's temple down through his cheek, disappearing beneath a tightly fastened collar. His expression was flat, unreadable, like someone who didn't care whether he was greeted with a handshake or a shotgun. Colt stepped out from the barn, his sleeves rolled and his shirt streaked with sweat. He didn't reach for his rifle, but his hand hovered near the post where it leaned just the same. The man slowed his horse and stopped a few feet from the gate. "Afternoon," he said with a tone too smooth for the roughness of the West. "Looking for someone?" Colt didn't blink. "Ain't many people out this way." The man pulled a folded paper from his coat. "Sealed with wax. Sheriff's mark. Girl named May. 16. Blonde. Claims she's deaf and mute. Word is she's been seen on a ranch east of Dry Creek." Colt's face didn't change. But his shoulders straightened, just a little. "What's your business with her?" "Legal matter," the man replied. "There's a complaint filed. Her father says she was taken. Sold, maybe, but under duress. I'm here to return her, by law." Behind them, the ranch gate creaked as it swung half open, and May stepped into view. She wore one of Colt's old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and a braid fell over her shoulder. Her feet were bare, dusty from the corral. But her face was no longer hollow like the day she arrived. There was fire in her now, slow burning but sure. She froze when she saw the man. Colt noticed it instantly, the way her hands twitched, the sudden tightness in her throat. That wasn't fear of the law. That was fear of him. The man didn't smile, but there was a flicker in his eye. "There she is." Colt stepped between them, arms crossed. "She ain't going anywhere unless she says so." "That's not how this works, rancher," the man said coolly, holding out the warrant. "She's underage. Her father's still her legal guardian. I've been paid to see she returns." Colt took the paper. "Read it." Folded it again. Then looked at May. "You want to go with him?" he asked. May didn't speak. Her hands began to tremble. Her lip quivered. Then, with a sudden rush of motion, she stepped forward, right past Colt, and stood in front of the stranger. "I'm not deaf," she said, voice cracking but clear. "And I'm not going back." The man's brows rose slightly, as if caught off guard. "My name is May Laramie. But I don't belong to Hank Laramie anymore. He sold me to strangers when I was 10. Locked me in barns. Told me not to speak. When Colt found me, I wasn't just silent, I was dead inside. He didn't buy me. He saved me." The man's jaw tightened. "Still, the law. You can tell the law I'd rather rot in a jail cell than ever call that man father again." The wind picked up around them, kicking dust across the yard. The horses stirred uneasily in the corral. The sheriff arrived an hour later, riding hard and alone. Colt had sent word through the telegraph the minute the man showed up. When the sheriff stepped down and saw May standing firm, shoulders square and eyes burning, he didn't ask many questions. "She's old enough to speak for herself now," he said. "And if she's chosen to stay, no paper in the world will force her back." The scar-faced man didn't argue. He turned, mounted his horse, and rode off without another word. That evening, as the sky turned lavender and the cicadas began to hum, May sat on the porch with Colt. She didn't say much at first, just rocked slowly on the edge of the steps, arms around her knees. "He's not just a messenger," she finally whispered. "He used to come around when my father was drunk. He watched me like I was property. I thought I'd never get away." Colt didn't ask more. He just reached out and gently placed his hand over hers. "You don't have to run anymore," he said. "You're already home." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. The seasons turned slowly on the prairie. The dry winds of summer gave way to golden leaves and chilled mornings. Winters came hard and white, but the ranch held firm, built on strong timber, quiet routines, and two souls learning how to live again. May was no longer the silent girl wrapped in someone else's coat. She was strong now. Her hair was longer, always tied back with a leather strap when she worked the stables. She spoke with ease, though only when she had something worth saying. She laughed, too, quiet at first, but over time, her laughter rang out over the corral, especially when she chased the younger colts through the dust. Colt had changed as well. The lines on his face softened. He still worked hard from dawn till dusk, but there was a new steadiness in his step, less burdened, more whole. He took to leaving his door open in the evening so the smell of May's cooking filled the house. And on Sundays, he fixed up the old porch swing his wife once used. May sat there most evenings, humming tunes that had no words, her eyes always scanning the horizon like she was watching over something precious. One spring evening, the grass wet from a fresh rain and the air thick with honeysuckle, Colt came back from town with a box tucked under his coat. He didn't say a word about it at supper. But after the dishes were done and the fire was glowing low, he stepped out onto the porch where May sat barefoot, shelling peas into a bowl. He stood in front of her awkwardly, cleared his throat, and scratched the back of his neck like a nervous schoolboy. "I ain't much for speeches," he began, eyes fixed on the ground. "And I know I'm not young, or polished like those men in town. I never learned the right words to say things proper." May looked up, a small smile forming at the corner of her lips. She set the bowl aside. Colt pulled the box from his coat pocket and opened it slowly. Inside was a simple silver ring. Not shiny. Not grand. But crafted with care, his own handiwork, hammered out in the blacksmith's forge 2 towns over. "I used to think I'd had all the love I was gonna get in this life," he said. "Thought what I lost couldn't be replaced. But then you showed up, and I realized I'd been surviving, not living." He knelt, not on one knee like some fairy tale, but both knees, like a man ready to plant himself into the earth and stay rooted there. "I want to be your home, May. Not your savior. Not your keeper. Just the man who walks beside you until the land runs out." May didn't speak right away. Her hands trembled as she lifted the ring from the box. Her eyes were glassy, but she didn't cry. She slipped the ring onto her own finger, then leaned forward and whispered into his ear. "I heard you, that day you dropped the coin. I heard the way your heart spoke." Colt looked up, blinking back the burn behind his eyes. "I figured you did," he said softly. They married 2 weeks later. Just the two of them, under the open sky, with the horses in the background and wildflowers all around. The preacher came from Dry Creek and left with a basket of maize cornbread and a promise not to tell the town just how much Colt Rayner had smiled that day. In time, folks stopped calling her the deaf girl or the rancher's ward. She became May Rayner, the woman who ran the ranch as fiercely and gently as the land itself allowed. People whispered about her strength, her story, her quiet magic. But no one knew all the details, and they didn't need to. Because on that wide, open land, where sorrow once lived, love had taken root. And it grew wild. Thank you for riding with us on this journey through the untamed heart of the West. If you were moved by this story, please subscribe to Storytelling and Beyond and tap the bell, so you never miss the next tale of courage, healing, and unforgettable love from the Wild West.